Senator Back.
Acting Deputy President, last night at the National Gallery here in Canberra, a book was launched by the ABC journalist Sarah Ferguson, written by a senior officer of the RSPCA. And the book, Backlash, has an uncanny resemblance to my surname. It is a book that discusses, in the views of the authors, the events leading up to the ban on the live export trade of cattle to Indonesia in 2011. And, of course, it gives a view which is very much at variance to my own. Acting Deputy President, just to remind you of the background if you're not aware of it, on Monday the 30th of May 2011, the Four Corners program on the ABC, led by Sarah Ferguson, showed images of shocking cruelty to animals in meatworks in Indonesia. This was followed soon afterwards by a carefully orchestrated media and email campaign to which all of us in this parliament were victims, and indeed it led to the Labor government of the day to collapse at the knees and to summarily ban the trade of live cattle to Indonesia without reference to anybody in the industry or anybody, including those in this place, who might have known a bit about it. This is not the place for me today to discuss the integrity or otherwise of the footage that we saw on that evening of the 30th of May. That's for another place and another time. But what I do want to do is to investigate and to expose the integrity of those who were part of the process that led to it, Acting Deputy President. The footage came into the possession of animal activists at about the end of February or March, and to his credit, the then Minister, Senator Ludwig, in a meeting on the 6th of April and subsequently a phone call on the 12th of April, asked for that footage, and it was refused. Incidentally, I was refused any opportunity to see this footage, as was the then Shadow Minister, Senator Colbeck. It was interesting because the question was asked of a young activist officer, why was it that the footage could not be made available? And her answer is very, very prescient. And the answer given, Acting Deputy President, was because we wanted to get our ducks in a row. I intend here this afternoon to explain what the ducks were and where the end of that row was, because the objective at that time and ongoing now was to destroy, if not the entire beef industry across the north of Australia, certainly to destroy the live export trade. And if there were a few victims along the way, and there were, then that was just collateral damage, Acting Deputy President. Why not February? Why not April? I will tell you why. Why the end of May? Why early June to have the effect in the beginning of June? It is simple. And there had to be somebody in this conspiracy who understood the cycle of the weather and the climate and the industry. Because at the end of May, Acting Deputy President, we are at the bottom of the income curve for the entire northern cattle industry. They had their last income in October of the previous year. They were at the bottom of their income curve, but they were at the top of their expenditure curve. All of the costs associated with supporting stations, all of the costs associated with mustering, with helicopters, with trucking, with station staff, etc., etc. Guess when that happened, Acting Deputy President? Right at the time when this ban was brought on. I'm not blaming Senator Ludwig for this. I certainly am blaming the then Labor government for its motivation, and it wasn't Senator Ludwig's. It was to get carbon tax and the then Prime Minister Gillard off the front page of the paper. But let me go back to this scandalous circumstance, because it is also the time, Acting Deputy President, when feed is starting to reduce on the rangelands, because the cows have got calves at foot, and last year's calves should have been on ships going up to Indonesia. The timing was so careful and so successful. So who was in on this? Well, certainly and regrettably the RSPCA seems to have been involved, because it would have been within their power earlier in the year to have actually produced that footage so that the Minister and the Department could have done something about it. Certainly GetUp was very much involved. Animal activists, we know, were very much involved. And indeed, Acting Deputy President, if the meat processors and the meat industry unions were involved, then they stand condemned. That they would try to do to a kindred part of their industry what ended up happening to that particular industry. I know from the email campaign there were people whose names were used who never even knew that they were sending these emails to us about banning this trade. Acting Deputy President, I introduced legislation into the Parliament this time last year to require that a person who had footage of what they believed to be cruelty to animals would be under an obligation to report that footage to a responsible authority so that it could be examined, investigated, and if found guilty, the person or people could be brought to justice. But that was never ever the motivation of this group of people. I regret to say it was not. The motivation, Acting Deputy President, was to try to bring this industry to its knees, and they jolly near did bring it to its knees. And I'm very proud to say that when all of that event took place, all members of the coalition and all senators associated with the coalition stood as one to push the government to reintroduce that trade. I give credit, Acting Deputy President, to the industry, of which I was associated for many years. All of the preparation of livestock for shipping, the transport, the feedlotting, the shipping, the standard of feedlots in our target markets. We have done an enormous amount over 30 to 40 years. People might be interested to know, of the 109 countries that export live animals for production purposes, we are the only one that has ever spent money and people and time to improve standards. And is it the case that standards needed to be improved in abattoirs? Yes, it was. But was this the way to achieve it, Acting Deputy President? No, it was not. And as Ms Alison Penfold from the Livestock Exporters Council has recently said, and quite rightly so, why could this group not have worked with us? Because look what has been achieved over the last 4 or 5 years, Acting Deputy President, not just within Australia, but particularly in our target markets, and the fact that we are having such a positive influence on standards of animal welfare in all of the target markets in which we operate. Where has there been any acknowledgement by the RSPCA or the activists or GetUp or anyone else for the improvements that have been made? Indeed, if this group were genuine about animal welfare standards, they would be coming on board and congratulating the industry for what it has achieved. And Acting Deputy President, if they had any interest in the welfare of animals beyond Australia's borders, they would be saying what Australia is doing is fantastic. What the exporters are doing, what the Agriculture Department, what the Minister has been doing is excellent. But no, we're not hearing about that. We are not hearing about it. And as Senator Colbeck said, we are the only country that has ever invested. And I could give you example after example of where the welfare of animals in our target markets has improved as a result of what Australia is doing. But what was the impact? Apart from the impact on Indonesia, where we completely destroyed our relationship with them because up to 69 million low socioeconomic Indonesians used to get their protein from Australian beef. That was, of course, affected. We had mass bankruptcies, we had suicides, Acting Deputy President, we had deaths of people. And of course, as I predicted, and as regrettably happened, we had massive starvation on the rangelands through that period of 2011-12, and I sat in this place and said, if we have a drought and or we have bushfires, we are going to have a disaster of monumental proportions. And did any of those animal activist groups or the RSPCA ever express any interest at all in the well-being of those animals that died of starvation on the rangelands, Acting Deputy President? No, they did not. And I go back, if I may, to the vision of the RSPCA to be the leading authority in animal care and protection. Well, they went missing. They went missing between 2011 and 12 in the north of Australia as a result of that. And I regret to say that. I regret to say it. Acting Deputy President, I simply ask the question in regard to the RSPCA, would anybody in this country blame the RSPCA if a person has purchased a pup or a kitten from their operation, subsequently brutalised that animal? Would anyone come back and say to the RSPCA it was your fault? No, of course they wouldn't. But in the live export trade, if there is a failure of animal welfare somewhere in the Middle East, somehow it's all of a sudden the fault of the industry here. I finished regrettably on the comment regarding Miss Sarah Ferguson from the ABC, who was part of the process and who appeared at a Senate inquiry when we were examining this issue. She had been in the Northern Territory. She said to me that she had provided footage to people that she spoke to from the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association. She demanded that she had, but regrettably I have evidence from the past president, Mr Ken Warriner, to say that Ms Ferguson didn't show him the footage and neither had she seen the footage. She was not honest in her answer to me. And secondly, in regard to a cattle station which she named in her show, 6 times offered her the opportunity to confirm that she had named that station, and each time we did not.
Thank
no,
you, Senator
we did
Back.
not.